That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, are communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV, radio and online. I'm with you until midday with a show jam-packed with all of today's biggest stories, lots of discussion and indeed expert guests. So make sure you get in touch throughout it all on GB Views at gbnews.uk. I'll be getting to those throughout the show. But before all of that, it's the latest headlines.
A very good morning. It's 10 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. More than 100 charities are urging the Home Secretary to create safer routes for refugees coming to the UK and to tackle the backlog in asylum claims. Well, Suella Braverman's come under scrutiny for her handling of poor conditions at a migrant processing centre in Kent. It's understood that hundreds were moved to the facility in Manston at the weekend, despite concerns of overcrowding. An immigration watchdog said they were left speechless by safety problems. Well, the MP Mark Spencer told GB News the government's working hard to fix the problem.
We're working with local authorities. We've invested over £20 million with our local authorities up and down the country to accommodate people in different places around the UK. But the answer is a multiple choice question, if you like. So we need to get on with the Rwanda plan. We need to make sure we break the business model of those people coming across the channel exploiting people, and we need to process them at the other end and make sure we get to the right conclusions as quickly as possible.
Well, the Shadow Minister for Immigration, Stephen Kinnock, claims the business model of the smugglers would be damaged if the Home Office is better resourced.
People aren't going to pay a huge amount of money to come to the UK if they know that their claim is going to be processed in 2 or 3 months, and if they are not valid asylum seekers, they'll be removed from the country. What they now know is with these massive backlogs in the system where it's taking years to process, that just by getting to the UK, you're guaranteed to be able to stay here for a considerable amount of time.
The person suspected of throwing several firebombs at a migrant centre in Dover has been found dead. Police were called to the viaduct yesterday, where the homemade devices had caused a fire, leaving 2 with minor injuries. The suspect was found at a nearby petrol station. As the new Prime Minister begins his first full week in office, pressure's mounting over his snub of an upcoming climate summit. According to reports, he's considering a U-turn on his decision not to attend COP27 in Egypt next week. His earlier stance that he must focus on domestic challenges sparked a backlash within the Tory party. Rishi Sunak has congratulated Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on winning the Brazilian presidential election. Lula narrowly defeated his opponent Jair Bolsonaro with 50.9% of the votes. Bolsonaro has not yet conceded his defeat. Last year, he'd openly discussed refusing to accept the results of the vote, claiming that Brazil's electronic voting system was vulnerable to fraud. Parts of Ukraine are without power and water supply after Russia targeted crucial energy facilities overnight. In the capital, Kyiv, a number of missiles damaged a hydroelectric power plant, leaving 350,000 homes in a blackout. Several other cities have come under attack. In recent weeks, Russia's increased missile attacks on Ukraine after blaming Kyiv for an explosion which damaged a bridge linking Russia with annexed Crimea. In India, 134 people have been killed after a suspension bridge collapsed. Eyewitnesses say several children are among the victims. The bridge over the Machu River was packed with hundreds of sightseers who'd been celebrating Diwali festival. The bridge had only been reopened to the public last week after a 6-month closure for renovations. Back here, the demand for new homes for first-time buyers has dropped by 1/3 since the former Chancellor's mini-budget. Well, that's according to the property company Zoopla. Mortgage rates soared to highs of 6% after the mini-budget, with many lenders pulling products from the market. Well, Zoopla's warning rates of 4 to 5% are likely to be the new norm. The staff at Co-op will be able to take paid time off for fertility treatments. A new policy will provide paid leave for the retailer's employees to attend medical appointments for treatments, including for people using a surrogate. This also includes partners that want to accompany those going to the appointments. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
Well, very good morning to you. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV, radio and indeed online. We've got such a great show for you lined up today to kickstart your day, and here is what's coming up this morning. The Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, calls the situation in Kent intolerable after a firebomb attack on a migrant processing centre in Dover. We'll be live in Westminster and in Dover to keep you up to date with all of the latest developments. And the Mail on Sunday claims that Russian agents hacked the phone of former Prime Minister Liz Truss. Are politicians taking the threat of cybersecurity breaches seriously enough? And how many politicians are potentially compromised? Also today, the man who broke into the home of Nancy Pelosi, the US Speaker of the House of Representatives, and attacked her husband, Paul, is expected to be charged later today. How serious a threat is violence in politics, both at home and across the Atlantic? Well, we've got all of that coming up with much more as well across the programme today, and you can get in touch through it all. As usual, email gbviews@gbnews.uk with your thoughts. Well, the top story today is undoubtedly the petrol attack on a migrant processing centre in Dover in Kent. It's made of the front pages of the Daily Express and the Daily Mail, of course. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has tweeted, "I am receiving regular updates on the situation. My thoughts are with those affected, the tireless Home Office staff and police responding. They must now support those officers as they carry out their investigation." Well, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, joins us now from Westminster. And Darren, this is the sort of crisis the Home Secretary really did not want to have this week. She was the focus of so much opposition attention last week. It's now getting to look quite chaotic at the Home Office.
It is, and in some ways there are suggestions this morning, not just from the opposition parties, but indeed from Sir Roger Gale, who's the MP for North Thanet, where many of these migrants are effectively staying, saying that this seems to have been a deliberate strategy on behalf of the Home Office. He couldn't say whether it was from Priti Patel or from Suella Braverman, but this idea that essentially the people in the Manston migrant camp, now that's different from what went on in Dover yesterday, but that they are not being moved onto hotels because there was a decision made in the Home Office not to provide more hotel accommodation for many of these migrants. Now, the camp in Manston is only meant to house 1,600 migrants for processing. It's not meant to be a permanent place where people spend days, weeks, or certainly months, though there are suggestions that many migrants may well have spent months there. But they are having to spend months there because they've got nowhere physically to move on to. Last night there were 4,000 people in that processing plant in Manston in Kent, an extraordinary number. Now, we think hundreds of them are going to be moved this morning, but clearly the facilities cannot cope. They've been described as wretched by inspectors who've gone to visit. Sir Roger Gales went with the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, yesterday or over the weekend, again to see how desperate things there are. Staff just unable to cope with the sheer numbers of people. Now, this is clearly not helped in addition by the fact that we have seen 1,000 migrants cross the English Channel again this weekend, so that only adds to those numbers. And as you say, it's not just the stress and distress of the situation in North Kent, it's also happening in South Kent, in Dover as well. We saw that attack, that petrol bomb attack. So yes, does this pile pressure on the Home Secretary? You bet it does. Suella Braverman, who's already under pressure for a whole lot of other reasons involving emails. And we are, I think, going to see an urgent question in Parliament later on today, Tom. We know Sir Roger Gales has submitted that already to Lindsay Hoyle, though I suspect we won't be hearing from the Home Secretary in Parliament. It probably will be the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, who answers that question.
And that's fascinating because this is a Conservative backbencher asking an urgent question of the government of the party of which he is a member. Normally, when there are urgent questions on matters like these, it's the opposition that are trying to embarrass the government or call forward a minister. What can we read into it that a Conservative MP is so clearly distressed about this situation?
Well, I think there are two things. First of all, just how desperate things are and how serious things are, clearly in both parts of Kent, and that there is a real sense that the government have allowed this yet again to continue to not get a grip of it. It must be noted, though, Roger Gales is not a big fan of the Rwanda policy put forward by the government. He is someone who wants to see a much closer relationship with France on this issue, saying this morning he wants to see grown-up politics between the UK government and the French government about how to try and stop people from crossing the Channel, from making those perilous journeys. Now, I think there is a sense that clearly Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has made it clear he is in favour of the Rwanda policy. We know Suella Braverman certainly is. She's talked about dreaming of it in the past. But I also think, Tom, there is a realisation within government, and this happened actually under Liz Truss as well, that this fundamentally will only be sorted out with the cooperation of France. We are due to see a French summit between the Interior Ministers at some point this autumn to talk about this, and I suspect we will see a further deal following that telephone conversation between the Prime Minister and the French President last week. I think we'll see some type of deal between the two countries to try and quell these numbers, which are at record numbers, it should be said. We're looking at 40,000 so far this year, well up on the, I think, 28,000 last year, which was well up on the year before this. This is a fundamental problem I think everyone recognises the government needs to get a grip with.
And yet people watching will think, how many deals with France have we had? How many millions of pounds have we given the French government? And how intractable has this situation turned out to be? I noticed that the commentator Dan Hodges this morning has been writing about grown-up politics and asking the question, well, what if there is no solution? What if the Labour Party saying that, being a bit nicer with France, and the Tory party saying we'll try and do this Rwanda thing against the wishes of the ECHR? What if there is no solution to the fact that just tens of thousands of people will risk life and limb to come to this country? Clearly, to some extent, the opposition and the government have been pretending it's easier to fix than it is.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes what governments do. They try and paint obvious solutions when that clearly isn't the case. There are a couple of things here I would suggest, Tom, at play. First of all, migration, illegal or otherwise, is not just a challenge, let's put it that way, to the UK. Clearly this is a challenge right across Europe. There are lots of countries trying to struggle with the migration of people, hence why some would suggest, and again Sir Roger Gale was on the radio this morning arguing this needs to be a pan-European solution, because many of these people are clearly travelling not just through France but often through Greece and Italy and elsewhere to get to the UK. Second of all, I mean the French deal, yes, you're right, they spent tens of millions of pounds, it's not quite worked out, though it would be wrong to say that it's been an unmitigated disaster. I mean the French have also prevented, I think it's around between 25 to 40% of crossings, so the numbers would be higher. They would be higher if the French border police at Calais and elsewhere were not involved in all of this. There are people like Anne Whittingham, again, you know, someone who's on the right of the Conservative Party, who says that fundamentally one of the reasons people want to come to the UK, it's not just the language, it's not just family relations, it's the fact that we do not have national ID cards in this country. They've got them in most other countries in Europe. It means it's much easier to find work here in the black market. She would argue that a proper solution to this is fundamentally introducing ID cards. But in the end, Tom, you are right. You know, if people are determined to come to this country by one means or another, it is actually quite difficult for states to stop everyone from doing so. What I would say is the biggest problem, though, Britain faces in many regards is the processing time for migration, which is extraordinary, up to 480 days. The target is 6 months. In some cases, it's taking 18 months. And until they clear that backlog, we are going to end up in this situation time and time again where there is simply not enough accommodation for people, and also, frankly, costing taxpayers up to £7 million a day. And that is fundamentally because the system here in the UK of processing claims does not work.
Really, really difficult stuff for the government to be dealing with here. Darren McCaffrey, thank you for going over it all live from Westminster for us there. Let's continue this conversation now with David Mellor, the former Home Office Minister, of course. And David, I suppose, looking at this situation, Britain has never before faced these kind of numbers coming across the Channel in small boats. Perhaps 40,000 this year already, up from 28,000 last year, up from around 10,000 the year before that. It's beginning to look exponential.
Yes, it is. It's beginning to look like an invasion. And that's why someone at some point has got to get a grip. Let's deal with some of the basic facts, first of all. No one who arrives in a small boat has a right to be in this country, because every one of them will have travelled through a country like France, which is a safe country. And so under the convention, they are not allowed then, effectively, having reached a safe place, to move on to a place that they prefer. Once we know that, it's obvious what the Home Secretary has got to do. And, you know, I spent 5 years at the Home Office. Admittedly, well, we didn't have this kind of problem. We had lots of other intractable problems. What has to happen is that they have to stop any of these arrivals having access to the English legal system. They shouldn't be here. They've no right to be here. But once they have access to the courts, once they have access to a lot of lawyers who will be, have their own political as well as legal reasons why they would want to take up these cases, then that it makes it almost impossible to deter people from coming. It also makes it impossible to deter people from coming that immediate solutions are not sought, putting up temporary accommodation. Look, once you allow these people to go into the community, this idea they stay in hotels that are open to other people, there is no incentive for any of these people not to come. And of course, it's worse than that, because if a lot of people are merely economic migrants, they just think Britain is better for them than where they came from. I hate to think how many billions of people that would apply to, but we can't be open to all of them, I hope. But the other issue on that is that we are in a position where we cannot be expected to cope with this level of influx. And in order not to cope with this level of influx, something has got to be done to turn people back. Once they arrive here in this country, you're never going to get rid of them. That's the experience.
But David Mellor, what do you say to those people, and many, many people who are very learned, who are the sort of lawyers that spend their lives gugging up the legal system and stopping deportations of individuals? Groups like Amnesty International, for example, who argue that the United Kingdom has signed up to a number of treaties, international treaties, that guarantee the rights of people who come here, that anyone who arrives in the United Kingdom is guaranteed by law, by statute, by international law, the ability
but I don't agree with that.
And to make their case.
I don't agree with that. The right to seek political asylum and asylum generally is based on the principle that you leave a country where you are under threat. And the moment you arrive at a country where there are no threats to you, you make your application there. Whereas a lot of these folk think they can travel through, I don't know, half a dozen countries, which would be perfectly safe for them in order to arrive in the UK. And this is totally subversive to a fair immigration policy. And we're told that the Home Secretary was at one point wanting to bring in more people from India because they would actually be able to work usefully in Britain, where we're short of key labour, skilled labour. That's fine because that is an orderly process. What isn't fine is somebody turning up on a beach in Kent and effectively jumping the queue. And I just think that if we are not tough on this, this problem will never go away. And of course, it's worse because what we have to deal with are not just people who think they would be happier in Britain. Perhaps they should be shown what it's really like in quite a lot of parts of Britain. That illusion might disappear. But what we have to be quite clear about is that arriving in the UK are not just people who are economic migrants, they are criminals. Look, I think the most shocking statistic, and please believe a shocking statistic, is that in 2020, 50 people arrived from Albania, and now it's 10 to 12,000. These Albanians have no reason to leave Albania except to be a part of the great Albanian export. I'm sure Albania exports lots of things. One thing it exports is criminals and criminal activities, particularly in drugs. And if we're going to have 10 or 12,000 Albanians here, maybe every year, that means there is no chance at all in controlling the drugs problem, and a lot of potentially violent, well-organized criminals will take over substantial chunks of inner cities in this country. That is not acceptable. It's a threat to the rights of every British citizen to lead a life where they are free from criminal activity.
Really, really pertinent point to pick up. The extraordinary rise in Albanian illegal migration. Albania is not a country divided by civil war or strife at this time. It's extraordinary that those numbers do come. And David Mellor, thank you as well for pointing out that very clear distinction between legal migration, proper migration, points-based migration, where people learn the language and fill a skills gap. That we welcome, of course. And the distinction between that and illegal migration, where people come jumping the queue without any order, without any process, and frankly, without any rules. David Mellor, really appreciate your thoughts, as always, on To The Point, former Home Office Minister and indeed MP for Putney. Thank you for joining us. Let's dive into more of this later. I'll be talking to our Home and Security.
I enjoyed that. I hope it wasn't technically too difficult.
In Dover for us. And also we'll be talking about the Liz Truss alleged phone hack. Was the former Prime Minister hacked by the Russians? Well, all that to come after the break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
It's 10:24, this is To The Point with Tom Harwood, and we're live on your TV, online and radio this morning. Well, now to the front page of The Guardian newspaper, which warns that the government ministers are creating Wild West conditions with use of personal phones to conduct confidential government business. This comes after the Mail on Sunday revealed that the former Prime Minister Liz Truss's phone was hacked by suspected agents of Russian President Vladimir Putin. However, Labour's Home Secretary, Shadow Home Secretary, I should say, Yvette Cooper, has questioned the timing of this release of the information. She says, quote, "There are immensely important national security issues raised by an attack like this by a hostile state, which will have taken extremely seriously by our intelligence and security agencies. There are also serious security questions around how and why this information has been leaked or released right now, which must also be urgently investigated." Well, joining me now to talk about all of this in more detail is Kevin Maguire, the Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me. I suppose here, this is an issue that all civilised Western democracies face. There are hostile foreign powers that do want to know what is going on in our countries. We're not alone in facing these threats. Is it your view that we're somehow different in how we handle them?
No, I think, Tom, all countries are at risk. And actually, look, let's not be naive about this. The UK will be spying on foreign powers. I'm sure they're doing everything possible for Vladimir Putin's intelligence to come out, including his phone and whatever they can do. And we've seen in the past the Americans were bugging Angela Merkel. And now we see coming back at the UK, Liz Truss seems to have been targeted, and it appears to be, or it's thought to be, the Russians because of Ukraine. And so I think it's not an exceptional problem. It's just whether our politicians are disciplined enough to try and counteract it by not using their own personal mobile phones for what is incredibly sensitive data, because it's said in the report, and Michael Gove, the Recall Levelling Up Secretary, gave this credibility, that a year's worth of messages, emails were downloaded from her phone. Now, that would have included friendly chats with people she met as Foreign Secretary around the world, but also Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor she was lining up for when she became Prime Minister. So there might have also been personal stuff in those messages which could potentially leave her open to public ridicule and blackmail. So it is a serious issue, and as the former head of MI5, Alex Younger, has said, that ministers need lessons in cyber safety, because a Wild West is being created and they may be just giving away secrets.
Now, should we speculate here on why it was yesterday that this story about Liz Truss's phone being hacked bubbled up into the Sunday papers? Of course, Last week we heard about this phone security issue of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, but perhaps this story making its way into the papers is somehow trying to build upon that and maybe destabilise the government. Is it too far to think that perhaps this is an issue that people who want to see this government fall might have been leaking or indeed pushing?
Yeah, Tom, that is perhaps one reason, although we found out about Suella Braverman's use to send sensitive emails around because she sent it to the wrong person. She sent it to the assistant of another MP instead of the wife of an MP she was aiming for. So she, in one sense, was the architect of her own problem there. One theory going round at the weekend, you've probably heard it, Tom, like me, wonder why a story comes out now and how, and often there's very good journalistic work involved. But one theory is, who would have known about Liz Truss's phone being hacked? Because very few people did. Boris Johnson, the then Prime Minister, did. Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, did. And is accused of suppressing the information so she could run and become Prime Minister. But the Home Office would have also known this. So one theory going round, which you can buy or not, but I think it would have to be interrogated because there could be something in it, is that Suella Braverman's people released it to try and take the heat away from her. Put it on Liz Truss, say, hey, it's not just her. It's a lot of people here. There's a wider problem. Why focus solely on her? Now, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I wouldn't dismiss it absolutely instantly.
And if it is true, what a spectacular backfire, because, of course, now the Labour Party is really focusing on the security issue, something that traditionally the Conservative Party has led on, being the party of law and order, of strong borders, of national security. Labour is now pushing the narrative that this is a government that, when it comes to home affairs, is in chaos.
No, you're absolutely right. It's a gift to Labour, unquestionably. And that you've got two leaks, a Prime Minister and a Home Secretary, both on national security, which, as you rightly point out, the Conservatives always like to make their big territory. Where safe, you will protect your security. And all of a sudden, it looks as if they're breaking the rules and they're all chaotic. And it also makes it very difficult for Rishi Sunak to say, look, I'm going to restore order within this government when it looks like there is deep-seated chaos. So, yep, if Suella Braverman's people leaked it about Liz Truss to try and take the heat off her, I think they've made a big mistake. But Braverman has shown herself not to be a very adept politician. She's very ideological, very reactionary, very hard line, but I would not say she's particularly smart in the game of politics.
Really, really interesting stuff there. I wonder to what extent will the government be biting the bait of the Labour Party with their urgent question later today. We'll have to wait and see. But for now, Kevin Maguire, thank you for joining us here on To The Point. Really appreciate your time. Well, after the break, I'll be bringing you more of our top story on that firebomb attack on the migrant centre in Dover. But you've been writing in about what you think about the Dover situation and about migration more widely. Penny has written to say you've not yet stressed the aspect that £6 million per day in housing migrants in hotels is recycling our money given in taxes. It stops tourists both overseas and home from accessing hotels. Well, Penny, you're right, but it's worse than that. It's not £6 million, it's £6.8 million a day. We'll be discussing this a little bit more later on the show with Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security Editor. But John has written in to say, it's OK for somebody in the population to sleep on the streets while strangers are paid for in hotels. We need a whole new political party, as present parties are useless. Well, John, I think a lot of people would share your thoughts there. It does seem extraordinary that almost £7 million a day are going on those hotel costs, although, on the other hand, one of the arguments about the overcrowding in this migrant detention centre is that the last Home Secretary, or one Home Secretary, either Priti Patel or Suella Braverman, have said we need to stop spending so much money on hotels, closing down that route and then making the situation in the camps much harder. So it's a very, very difficult problem. But Jack in North Wales has written in to say, I'm so fed up of this situation. Migrants need to go back to France and we don't want them here. And Malcolm in Carlisle agrees. He says, stop the boats in the Channel, turn them back. The very irritating thing about this, of course, is that France doesn't want them back. We don't have a deal with France to turn them back, and indeed, the Channel is an international shipping lane. So Britain doesn't rule all of the waves in this area. We'd need to either break international law or come to a deal with President Macron in order to turn back boats. And I'm not sure that Macron is ready to make that deal. Perhaps I'll be proved wrong, but it does seem like this is a crisis that is going to continue for quite some time. We'll discuss it more as the programme goes on, but after the break I'll be bringing you more, of course, on that firebomb attack, and Mark White will be bringing us the latest. Before that, here's the morning's news with Rosie Wright.
Thanks, Tom. A very good morning. It's 10:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. The Home Secretary is under increasing pressure over the backlog of migrants arriving in the UK and the conditions of processing centres. It's understood hundreds of migrants were moved to an already overcrowded facility in Kent at the weekend. An immigration watchdog said they were left speechless by safety problems at the site in Manston. The Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, visited the site yesterday and admitted the conditions were challenging. Well, meanwhile, Kent police have confirmed the person suspected of throwing several firebombs at a migrant centre in Dover has been found dead. Police were called to the viaduct yesterday after reports of a fire. 2 people suffered minor injuries. The suspect was found dead at a nearby petrol station. Parts of Ukraine are without power and water supply after Russia targeted crucial energy facilities overnight. In the capital, Kyiv, a number of missiles damaged a hydroelectric power plant, leaving 350,000 homes in a blackout. Several other cities have also come under attack. 134 people have been killed in India after a suspension bridge collapsed. Eyewitnesses say several children are among the victims. The bridge over the Machu River was packed with hundreds of sightseers celebrating the Diwali festival. It was only reopened to the public just last week after a 6-month closure for renovations. The King and the Queen Consort have sent their condolences to people affected by the deadly Halloween stampede in South Korea's capital. 154 people have died, most of them in their 20s, following a crowd surge in a popular night spot. The government's vowed to investigate what caused the accident and to make institutional changes so that it wouldn't be repeated. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank and, of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
A very good morning to you. It's 10:37 and this is To The Point with me, Tom Harwood, on GB News. Well, Kent police are continuing their investigation into the attack on a Home Office migrant centre this morning. Petrol bombs were thrown at the facility in Dover before the suspect behind the attack was found dead nearby with a further device in their vehicle. Suspected migrants that were being held at the Home Office site have now been moved to the nearby Manston migrant processing centre, despite concerns of overcrowding there already. Well, the Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick had visited Manston's site yesterday, and he called the current situation intolerable. Let's join Mark White now, who is in Dover for us, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, of course. And Mark, just firstly, let's get the difference between these two things clear. There is a migrant centre in Dover that was firebombed, and there's a processing centre called Manston, which is overcrowded. And I suppose these two problems are related in a way that one affects the other. But the firebomb attack, we don't really know the cause behind.
Well, we know, of course, it has come against a backdrop of increasing tension and anger at the number of people who are coming across in these small boats across the English Channel. Now, you're right, there are two facilities, both effectively doing the same thing. But when people come across the Channel, they're brought here, first of all, to this processing centre. It opened 2 or 3 months ago, actually, at a cost of about £2 million. There was another processing centre just about 100 yards from here, but it was just too small, so they opened this one. It's got a perimeter fence around it just to make it that bit more secure and to obviously keep the prying eyes of the media out of it as well. There's marquees in there and they can deal with hundreds of people at a time, and of course they were over this weekend, where just short of 1,000 people arrived on Saturday, and then again yesterday just short of 500 arrived, so almost 1,500 people arriving across the Channel just this weekend. And people are meant to be processed here for no more than a few hours, 24 hours maximum. Fingerprints taken, biometric details taken, any documents they might have, although a lot of them, most of them actually throw away their documentation. They're interviewed and then they're put in, as we know, interim accommodation. That's hotel accommodation, or perhaps accommodation in the rented centre, or council house accommodation. Similar system in Manston. Those that are processed here, they might just get an hour or two here, then they go off to Manston. But Manston is really, really busy as well, Tom. Some 4,000 people there. There's only supposed to be a maximum of 1,000 at Manston, and they're supposed to be dealt with, as I say, within 24 hours. I just want to quickly show you, just to get our bearings of where we are. This is the Western jet foil at this processing centre in Dover Harbour. It was here that this vehicle, the white Seat, drove down at 20 past 11 yesterday morning, drove down from up there from the direction of the town, came down past where you see those two lorries are, and came down into this area here, pulled up at the perimeter fence, and then the man inside was seen by witnesses to lob incendiary devices at the perimeter fence. You can see the scars, so the charring from the flames of that fire that broke out at this particular spot at the perimeter fence. Very dramatic images, of course, that we played on air, Tom, that showed those security personnel rushing to try to put out the flames as that particular fire took hold. We're told that a couple of people were slightly injured. It was just after that that a Reuters photographer said he then saw the suspect drive to a nearby petrol station, which again is back up that road, the road that the suspect came down. And at that point, according to the Reuters photographer, who was very shaken by what he saw, he said that the man took his own life. It's all under investigation. There is no motive yet as far as Kent Police is concerned, or at least they haven't released what they suspect the motive was. They say they're keeping an open mind.
Really fascinating stuff there, Mark White. Thank you for showing us exactly the geography of what happened there, because it does seem extraordinary that this incendiary device was thrown at what is quite a flimsy fence there. Mark White there showing us all of the situation live from Dover. Mark, I don't know if you can still hear us, but if so, could you let us know exactly how much damage this incendiary device did? Because just looking there, although the fire was impressive in the video, it doesn't look like it's actually materially harmed the operation of the site.
No, I mean, if you look over at the fence again, actually, we just had to jump out of the way either that, or you might have had another casualty to report with these lorries that are coming round here around the harbour. But you can see the fence there. It's actually a metal fence, so it's reasonably sturdy. There's certainly charring up it. You can't see it particularly well because the metal itself is very dark in colour, but yeah, there was flames on this side and flames on the other side of what is a kind of almost like a grated metal fence there. And as I say, we know a couple of people were injured as they were tackling the fire at that point. But of course, it could have been a lot worse, because I'm sorry, I'm just going to get the camera to move again, and apologies to Ben for moving him all over the place. But you can see just at the top of the fence there, glaring into the sun, I'm afraid, but that is the top of one of the marquees. And this was one of the marquees housing hundreds of asylum seekers who were being processed. So of course, it just shows you that within a matter of feet, if the incendiary device had cleared that perimeter fence, it would have been at the marquee. So a very troubling incident, it goes without saying there. But as I say, it adds really to what is a deepening crisis, and with 1,500 more people coming across the English Channel throughout the weekend, they have had to be processed here. 700 of them have had to be transferred to Manston, just adding to the backlog that's already there, not dealing with people within 24 hours. Some people have been there for a month. 4,000 is the population of Manston at the moment. It's only supposed to deal with a capacity of 1,000, and that's adding to tensions. We've heard about outbreaks of disease that are there as well. It's something that, of course, the Home Secretary is being questioned on, or there are increasing questions for her to answer about what she is doing.
Well, Mark White, thank you for bringing us that there live from Dover, of course, right at the scene of the incident. Well, let's get more on this now. Kevin Saunders is the former Chief Immigration Officer at the UK Border Force in Calais and joins us now. Thank you for making the time. I suppose when it comes to what we're seeing now, the sheer numbers of individuals, the tension that is rising, and indeed the lack of facilities to process, there's no other word to describe this than a crisis.
Good morning, Tom. No, I'm afraid you're quite right. It's an absolute crisis. We're losing. And that's a very sad thing to have to admit to.
Oh, Kevin, I hope that your connection is still strong there. Let's continue by describing, by trying to explore some of the options that the government might have, because the Labour Party, for their part, say that we need to do more deals with France. The Conservative Party are trying to get this Rwanda plane off the tarmac. Neither seem to be that politically possible right now.
Right, well, let's deal with the first question. we've been trying to do an effective deal with the French for over 20 years, and we've had little victories. But the real big thing about stopping these migrants, we haven't. Paris views the situation in a totally different way to the way that we in the UK view it. So I wouldn't hold your breath about getting an effective agreement with France, because to be realistic, the only effective way would be for the French to get the Gendarmerie Maritime out from Boulogne and actually patrol the Channel, something that they have refused on a number of occasions to do.
I suppose in their eyes, they don't want a whole load of potentially tens of thousands of migrants dumped back on their shores. It's a sort of cleaning their hands of the situation.
The French view the law of the sea differently to us. The French say that it is unlawful for them to actually stop these boats on the Channel unless they are actually in danger of sinking. So the French are quite happy, and they say they're doing the right thing by letting them travel to the international borderline across the Channel and into our waters. So that's the French view, and that's it. There are things we could do, and I've been suggesting over the weekend that we need to think a little bit off the page here, and I would put a cruise liner in the Channel, in international waters in the Channel. So it would be a little bit further down the Channel. I would take all of these small boats, not to the UK, but to this cruise liner. Now, that would do two things. It would, first of all, give us a big break in the UK, a big period of time to sort things out a little bit more.
Yes.
But also, since 70% of the people coming across are Albanians, they have no right to claim asylum. They haven't landed in the UK, therefore they can't claim asylum.
That is the crucial distinction there, whether or not they land in the UK, because that then gives them all of those rights. Kevin, I'm afraid we have run out of time here, but thank you so much. I'm really glad you managed to get that point across, because it's a really, really fascinating one. Kevin Saunders there, the former Chief Immigration Officer for the UK Border Force in Calais. Well, now, next on Friday, David DePape is alleged to have charged into the California home of US Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, with a hammer, shouting, "Where's Nancy?" before attacking her husband, Paul. Now, Paul Pelosi is said to be recovering well after surgery following the attack, but DePape is expected to be charged later today with attempted murder. Let's discuss this now with the chair of Republicans Overseas UK, Greg Swenson. Greg, clearly there has been a lot of vitriolic language in US politics, a coarsening of debate. To what extent do you think horrific incidents that no doubt people of all parties would think are horrific, but incidents like these, to what extent do you think they are informed, perhaps inspired by the language and perhaps the brashness of Donald Trump?
Oh, I surely wouldn't blame the president only. I mean, President Trump. I mean, I thought you were going to ask the question whether it was about, hostile political rhetoric in general. And I think there is a lot of that. Now, in this particular case, I don't want to put too much emphasis on that, because this guy was clearly deranged and had mental health issues. He's been living in a bus or a van. He's had psychotic episodes. I mean, this is not a person who was, getting overexcited about some political rant. So I wouldn't really blame the political hostility on this particular incident. But you're right, there has been a lot of rhetoric that is elevated to the point where it inspires people to use violence on both sides. And we saw that with the assassination attempt on Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh by a person who did not have the psychotic episode history that this assailant did. So I think you have to look at each situation individually. In this case, I surely wouldn't blame President Trump, I would blame the whole political system for elevating the rhetoric in the last few years. But I wouldn't just put that all on President Trump at all, because it happens as much with the Democrats as it does with President Trump.
And I suppose we should remember that it was only in 2018 when Senator Rand Paul was attacked on his lawn while he was mowing his lawn as well. And not just in the United States, of course, in the United Kingdom. Sir David Amess was stabbed to death.
Yeah.
And equally, we've had now two murders of sitting Conservative MPs in the last of sitting MPs, one Labour, one Conservative, in the last 7 years. Is this something that is going on in Western democracies? Is this different from where we were a couple of decades ago?
Well, I look at whether it's purely political violence like you had with the riots in the summer of 2020, like you had with the threat on Brett Kavanaugh, or it's a psychotic episode. I mean, I go back to 1981, the assassination attempt on President Reagan. That wasn't political. Nobody blamed the Democrats for disliking Reagan. I mean, John Hinckley was clearly deranged. And so I think you have to separate the two. But you do have a point that the rhetoric has been elevated to the point where it causes some people to take it too far. I don't dispute that, and I think it would be healthy if everybody toned it down a little bit and brought down the rhetoric. A lot of these issues are not end of the world issues; they're just differences of opinion, and they should be treated that way.
Well, Greg Swenson, thank you so much for your time here this morning on To The Point. We really do appreciate it. Chair of Republicans Overseas UK, of course. Well, now a poll for Savanta Comres and King's Maudley Partnership has revealed that 72% of parents expect the cost of living to affect the mental health of their children. Now, this comes as the number of under-18s being admitted to adult psychiatric wards has increased by 30%. Due to the need for immediate care and a lack of adequate child's resources. That's according to the Care Quality Commission. Well, let's talk about this in more detail with Dr. Pam Spur, a psychologist. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me this morning. Is there a crisis in the mental health of our children?
There is a crisis. And particularly one of your producers pointed out one very difficult story of a young girl with BDD, body dysmorphic disorder, and how her parents were so worried about things like turning on the electrics, turning on the water because she likes to shower a lot, and things like that, because BDD, body dysmorphic disorder, is something that's not very understood, but is affecting more and more adolescents in particular. We all understand things like body image, where there's a spectrum from one end where you feel very happy with your body to the other end where you feel very unhappy. But BDD is the extreme end of that. And for instance, my very dear friend Charlie King, who has a very large media profile due to his television work, came out recently about his struggles with BDD and how that's impacted his mental health. So we have all sorts of unusual things going on with adolescents, from things like BDD to anxiety and depression. And a lot of these are fed into by parental worries about economics, putting on the heat, buying enough food. And unfortunately, what parents don't realize is in young children, they are like emotional sponges. So if they're struggling with, say, their body image or anxiety about exams or friendships, their parents getting stressed about all these significant problems we have in the economy feeds into that. And there are simply not enough child services and adolescent services to help.
And yet we've had economic crises before. Some would say it's been a lot harder in the past to live than it has been today. Might the growth in concern about children's mental health be more to do with revealing something that has always been there, rather than something that is growing right now?
I think that's a good point, Tom. However, I would disagree. When I started in the NHS in the mid-90s, working in the adolescent and child psychology and psychiatry department of a major London teaching hospital, we had some waiting list issues, but not a lot. And people were still very aware of the issues that may be affecting their children that they might call on psychological services for. But what we've seen in the 2 decades since that, and 2.5 decades since when I first started the NHS, is the impact of social media on transmitting fears, anxieties, and worries. Parents being more stressed about all sorts of things and perhaps not parenting, not taking responsibility for how much their children are on things like social media. And so it's almost like a contagion. So a lot of children are impacted by how their friends are feeling, what they see on social media. And also there is a more openness. So they are sort of more willing to talk about it. But there have the significant change I really put down to those two things, social media and parents just not getting on top of this, supporting their children younger so they do not need mental health services.
Well, Dr. Pam Spur, psychologist, thank you so much for joining me and talking me through that, a really, really important issue there. Always appreciate your thoughts. Now, of course, the other thoughts that we really appreciate here on GB News are yours at home. Do email us in, gbviews@gbnews.uk, on all of the subjects we've been discussing today. We'll be back with more of them all after the break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio,
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV, radio and online. I'm with you until midday with a show jam-packed full of today's biggest stories, lots of discussion and indeed expert guests. So make sure you get in touch with your views. As usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'll be getting to those throughout the show. But first, here are the latest news.
A very good morning. It's 11 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Home Secretary is under increasing pressure over the backlog of migrants arriving in the UK and the conditions of the processing centres. It's understood hundreds of migrants were moved to an already overcrowded facility in Kent at the weekend. An immigration watchdog said they were left speechless by safety problems at the site in Manston. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick visited the site yesterday and admitted the conditions were challenging. The MP Mark Spencer told GB News the government's working hard to fix the problem.
We're working with local authorities. We've invested over £20 million with our local authorities up and down the country to accommodate people in different places around the UK. But the answer is a multiple choice question, if you like. So we need to get on with the Rwanda plan. We need to make sure we break the business model of those people coming across the channel exploiting people, and we need to process them at the other end and make sure we get to the right conclusions as quickly as possible.
Well, the Shadow Minister for Immigration, Stephen Kinnock, claims that if the Home Office was better resourced, the smugglers' business model would be damaged.
People aren't going to pay a huge amount of money to come to the UK if they know that their claim is going to be processed in 2 or 3 months, and if they are not valid asylum seekers, they'll be removed from the country. What they know now is, with these massive backlogs in the system where it's taking years to process, that just by getting to the UK, you're guaranteed to be able to stay here for a considerable amount of time.
Climate activists have targeted several major buildings in London this morning with orange spray paint. Just Stop Oil say its supporters sprayed paint from fire extinguishers on the Home Office, the MI5 building and the Bank of England, among others. They're demanding the government halts all new oil and gas licences. City of London police say 2 people were arrested outside the Bank of England. The King and the Queen Consort have sent their condolences to people affected by the deadly Halloween stampede in South Korea's capital. 154 people have died, most of them in their 20s, following a crowd surge in a popular night spot. The government's vowed to investigate what caused the accident and to make institutional changes so that an accident like that won't be repeated. Rishi Sunak has congratulated Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on winning the presidential election. In Brazil, Lula narrowly defeated his opponent, Jair Bolsonaro, with a 50.9% share of the vote. Bolsonaro has not yet conceded his defeat. Last year, he openly discussed refusing to accept the results of the vote, claiming that Brazil's electronic voting system was vulnerable to fraud. Parts of Ukraine are without power and water supply after Russia targeted crucial energy facilities overnight. In the capital, Kyiv, a number of missiles damaged a hydroelectric power plant, leaving 350,000 homes in a blackout. Several other cities have also come under attack. In recent weeks, Russia has increased missile attacks on Ukraine after blaming Kyiv for an explosion which damaged a bridge linking Russia with annexed Crimea. In India, 134 people have been killed after a suspension bridge collapsed. Eyewitnesses say several children are among the victims. The bridge over the Machu River was packed with hundreds of sightseers celebrating the Diwali festival. It was only reopened to the public last week after a 6-month closure for renovations. The demand for new homes for first-time buyers has dropped by a third since the former Chancellor's mini-budget. Well, that's according to the property company Zoopla. Mortgage rates soared to highs of 6% after the mini-budget, with many lenders pulling their products from the market. Well, the company's warning rates of 4 to 5% are likely to be the new normal. Staff at the Co-op will be able to take paid time off for fertility treatments. A new policy will provide paid leave for the retailer's employees to attend medical appointments for treatments, including people using a surrogate. Well, it also includes partners that want to accompany those going to appointments. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
A very good morning to you. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV, radio and online. Now, we've got a very great show for you lined up over the final hour. Here's what's coming up. New reports suggest that the former Prime Minister Liz Truss's phone was hacked while she was Foreign Secretary, with her communications potentially falling into foreign hands. And newly appointed Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing pressure over his Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, over those alleged security breaches. British universities are facing multi-million-pound legal action files from students demanding refunds following the COVID pandemic. Many universities were forced to close and provide a reduced service to students, and students still paid full fees. I'll be speaking to a solicitor who's helping students to get a refund on those fees. And fresh Russian missile strikes have hit the Ukrainian capital city of Kyiv this morning. This comes after news reported, the reported news of Liz Truss's phone being hacked over the summer, suspected to have been conducted by people working on behalf of the Kremlin. I'll be discussing the implications for all of us here at home. And so much more to come as well across this programme. Remember, get in touch through it all. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the address to email. Well, let's get to the latest in politics. New reports suggest that the former Prime Minister Liz Truss's phone was hacked while she was Foreign Secretary, with her communications falling into foreign hands. The allegation suggests agents working for Russia were responsible and that the hack was discovered during the leadership campaign in the summer, but was suppressed. And newly appointed Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing pressure over his Home Secretary on a similar affair, Suella Braverman's handling of government migrant problem. This comes after a man hurled petrol bombs at a migrant centre in Dover yesterday, and of course, Suella's own personal email issues that were learnt about last week. Well, our political editor Darren McCaffrey is in Westminster for us now to go over all of this. And Darren, I suppose politicians' phones must be hacked all the time. What's the pertinence of the Liz Truss affair?
Well, you say that Ian Duncan Smith, who obviously former Conservative leader, essentially said yesterday, Tom, that he just works on the assumption that his phone has been hacked all of the time. And I think there is concern, isn't there, particularly among the security services, that in the end, this is the kind of soft underbelly, I think they call it, of the way that foreign states and enemies of the UK are able to gain access, to gain information, to gain intelligence. On the Liz Truss affair, I think there are two things. First of all, this may well have happened after she took her personal phone to Moscow when she went to visit the Russian Foreign Minister, Secretary Lavrov, earlier on this year. Now, that was against the advice of the security services at the time. And it is felt that it is maybe then that her phone was hacked. Clearly, that is very disturbing, given the fact that we know they gained access to private conversations between her and Kwasi Kwarteng, that they gained access to conversations between the then Foreign Secretary and other foreign ministers, particularly pertaining to the war in Ukraine, and that this was actually all known about during the summer, but the decision was made between the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Cabinet Secretary Sir Simon Case not to release that information, but rather to suppress it over the summer. And there had been suggestions, Tom, that clearly Liz Truss was slightly concerned that if this news came out during the campaign, it may well damage her chances of becoming Prime Minister. It's not necessarily a good look, as Suella Braverman is finding out herself, that those at the top of the government seemed a bit laissez-faire, let's say, about security, given the fact that we all know, as the security services repeatedly tell us, that gaining intelligence, whether it is from foreign states or indeed people acting on behalf of foreign states, is a real security threat to the United Kingdom that could have very, very serious consequences indeed.
And the Labour Party today is tying this all up in an urgent question in the House of Commons, talking about not only the security issues with regard to phone hacking or the rest of it, but surely tying in the security of the nation as well to the migration question, which we have seen really come to a focus over the last 24 hours, the firebombing of one processing centre and the overcrowding of another.
Yeah, indeed, and those two are in some ways related. Coming on to that in a second. First of all, yeah, there are also questions for Suella Braverman this morning, again, about the use of that private email, the forwarding on of confidential information, first of all, to her private email address, and then on to a Conservative MP and CCing in the wrong person. There are many questions about the timeline of events, what precisely happened. Did she come forward, as she has suggested, and indeed it seems the Prime Minister, to own up to the mistake, or whether she was confronted by it? Labour still trying to pile the pressure on that. But you're right in saying the biggest story today is clearly what's happening with those migration processing camps in two parts of Kent. First of all, in Dover, one that was firebombed yesterday. Now, thankfully, there were only a couple of people injured in a minor way yesterday, though the man who perpetrated the crime did kill himself. But what it meant is that hundreds of migrants at that processing centre were then moved on to Manston processing, which is in North Kent, in Thanet, which is already overcrowded. It's meant to only hold around 1,500 people for around 48 hours. It's currently got 4,000 people, many of them who are there not just for days, but many, many weeks instead. The conditions are said to be pretty dire there. We had inspectors last week frankly saying it's not fit for purpose. The immigration minister travelled with the local MP over the weekend to see conditions for himself, and I suspect we'll hear from that immigration minister, Robert Jenrick, a little later on today. But there is a lot of anger about this, about how the government has allowed it to get it this far. One of the local MPs, the Conservative MP for Dover, saying this morning that what is needed is now an entirely fresh approach, that the situation is out of control. And she says that what is happening is simply not working because every single attempt to get on top of this is delayed or thwarted by a ragbag of people who seem to want open borders and don't seem to want us to get a grip of this particular situation. Whatever way you look at it, it is a very, very difficult moment for the government, particularly for the Home Secretary. Suggestions, in essence, that she could have massively added to this problem by not booking hotel accommodation when she was Home Secretary first time around, which is against her statutory duty. And that, in essence, has led to this massive backlog that means that the Home Office could be sued by each of those migrants to thousands of pounds, simply adding to the cost of millions of pounds that this backlog of asylum seekers is costing the UK taxpayer every single day.
Absolutely, and £6.8 million spent every day on hotel rooms as it stands before even booking any more. Darren McCaffrey, thank you for all of the latest there from Westminster. We'll be catching up with Darren throughout the day. But joining us now is the pollster and Professor of Politics, psephologist extraordinaire at the University of Strathclyde, Sir John Curtis. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I suppose, looking at this question, the Labour Party are trying to turn this into a question of security, of competence, of whether or not the Conservative Party is the party of law and order. Where does public opinion sit on this? Has the Conservative Party lost what was once a very clear lead in this area?
Well, the honest truth is, Tom, that at least in the recent past, the Conservatives have been so far behind Labour in the polls, so far as people's perceptions of the competence of the Conservative Party in general is concerned, that you've been able to get polls that have asked people, 7, 8, 9, 10 issues, including immigration, and the Conservatives are behind on every one of them. The problem the Conservatives faced in the wake of Liz Truss's administration is the knock to the party's reputation for competence in general. That said, I think the second thing one needs to understand about the issue of migrants in particular, the migrants coming across the English Channel, how they should be treated, and in particular the government's at least original proposed resolution of this, which was that anybody who comes to the UK over the Channel would be sent to Rwanda to have their asylum application processed. That just divides the public pretty much down the middle. For the most part, Conservative supporters think this is a good idea. Opposition voters tend to think it's a bad idea. Now, to that extent, at least, it's quite a good issue for the Conservatives potentially because at least it helps them to reconnect with their core vote. On the other hand, it's not necessarily an election-winning strategy in that it is an issue where there are quite a lot of voters who are antagonistic to what the government is doing as well as those who are supportive of it.
And yet, for some areas, the government seems to, under Rishi Sunak, have recovered a little bit of ground in the last couple of days. There was one poll that showed that on the economy, for example, really crucial question there, the Conservative Party has now slipped ahead of the Labour Party. Are there signs of recovery here? Or, I suppose the headline figures are still a very, very big gap.
Well, yes. Let's look at the headline figures first, then come back to what you were specifically referring to. So, two things are clear. One is that Mr. Sunak is an awful lot more popular than Liz Truss was. And indeed, when voters are being asked to choose between him and Sir Keir Starmer as a Prime Minister, the polls that have been done in the last week have pretty much had them neck and neck. So, and Mr. Sunak in particular is widely regarded as being a competent Prime Minister, even by those who are not inclined to support the Conservative Party, although they also tend to feel he's somewhat out of touch. So I think there is no doubt that Mr. Sunak's personal political position is an awful lot stronger than that of his predecessor. So far, however, so far as the headline voting intention is concerned, the impact of this on the Conservatives has been somewhat muted, and perhaps rather less than we might have expected. We've had 7 opinion polls done in the last week by companies who also polled in the last week of Liz Truss's administration. They, on average, had the Conservative vote up by 4 points, Labour down by 3. But that still means that Labour have an average lead in the polls of around 25 points, i.e. much more than enough than is required for them to be able to get an overall majority. But then, yes, as you mentioned, specifically on the issue of the economy, well, we've only so far had a scattering of evidence. Certainly the evidence of the opinion poll on Sunday, which you're referring to, was quite striking in that actually the Conservatives were more likely to regard as being competent on the economy than virtually anything else. Although, again, I think one should note there that the word Rishi Sunak was attached to that question, and that could make a difference. BMG, for example, in the poll that came out earlier in the weekend, asked people both about which party was best on the economy and then also which leader was best on the economy. And on the party question, Labour were well ahead. On the leader question, Mr. Sunak was well ahead. So again, there's this question of to what extent is the personal respect that people have for Mr. Sunak as a Prime Minister, and perhaps particularly with respect to the economy as a former Chancellor, how far this is going to translate into people beginning to think rather more favourably of the Conservative Party as an institution. I think certainly that's the trick that Mr. Sunak has to perform. He has to persuade people that their regard for him as an individual should be transferred to his party. So far, at least, that's a project that's only made a degree of progress, and certainly not enough to put the Conservatives back to being competitive with the Labour Party more broadly.
Yes, and it could take some time, I suppose. And before then, I suppose we'll start seeing a lot more sort of presidential-style campaigning from the Conservatives. I'm old enough to remember back to 2017 when the Conservatives, for a brief moment, tried to campaign not as the Conservative Party, but as Theresa May's team, something they quickly tried to undo several weeks into that general election. Sometimes presidential-style campaigning cannot be the most successful thing if opinions change about individuals. Just finally, in this conversation, Sir John, what do the Conservatives need to do now to try and shift that perception of competence from the Prime Minister to the party?
Well, of course, the central thing that faces this government in the next 2 or 3 weeks is, as it were, to provide something more than the sticking plaster that's been applied so far to the fiscal difficulty that's been created in the wake of Liz Truss's and Kwasi Kwarteng's now infamous fiscal event. And of course, the difficult task that the government faces there is that they're going to have to engage in a degree of fiscal consolidation, not at a time when the public services are thought to be doing relatively well, which was the position back in 2008 when we had the consequences of the financial crash, but at a time when the public services are not regarded as being in terribly good shape, particularly the health service, because of the consequences of COVID. And I think certainly probably almost undoubtedly the government is going to have to do much more in the way of tax rises than George Osborne did when he tried to consolidate the revenues in 2010. And the question is whether or not in the wake of that, what's going to happen to the Conservatives' reputation as a party for economic and fiscal competence. That's potentially going to be a difficult sell. But if indeed, at least one, he manages to indeed get the markets to be satisfied, and therefore, as a result, mortgage rates don't go up as much as they might otherwise have done. And two, 12, 18 months down the track, actually, the fiscal finances are in a better state. He can begin to reverse some of these tax increases, and the economy does indeed to grow. Then, in those circumstances, maybe the Conservatives will be able to turn things around. And of course, more broadly, he does need to avoid the kind of political storm that's currently being surrounding the Home Secretary. I mean, this all has slightly the whiff of, are people being entirely straight? Are they keeping to the rules? Now, these were all the kinds of issues that began to dog the Conservative Party in the wake of the Partygate affair, and it badly needs to avoid these. It needs, in a sense, to be squeaky clean for an awful long period of time. But again, that damage to the Conservative reputation, which has never really gone away, if that's going to be reversed as well.
Really, really interesting stuff there. So, Sir John Curtis, thank you for talking us through all of it. I'm looking forward to the polls as they come out in the next few weeks to see if that trend continues or not. Well, next on the programme, universities are facing multi-million-pound legal action threats from students demanding refunds from the COVID pandemic. After the break, I'll be talking to one solicitor involved in the legal fight.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
It's 11:25 and this is To The Point with me, Tom Harwood, on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and indeed on DAB plus radio as well. Well, British universities are facing multi-million-pound legal action from students demanding refunds. The pandemic meant that many universities were forced to close facilities, move classes online and provide a reduced service overall to students. But most of these students still had to pay the full set of tuition fees. Solicitors have now teamed up to help students claim compensation after so many were forced to pay tens of thousands of pounds in fees. Well, let's now speak to one of those solicitors. Simon Goldwater is solicitor for studentgroupclaim.co.uk. Good morning. You're helping these students with these claims, but I suppose some people might argue, that across the entire economy, things had to close, services were reduced. Is it right to be going back and relitigating all of this?
Yeah, thank you. It's right, because students, like any other consumers who've paid for something and not received what they paid for, deserve their fair compensation. And they've paid for in-person tuition, they've paid for access to libraries, laboratories, social spaces, everything else you expect on a normal university experience. And during COVID and during strike action over recent years, they just didn't receive what they had paid for. And that's what this student group claim is all about, to get them what they deserve.
These universities that have been issued with letters of claim on the screen now, Birmingham, Bristol, Cardiff, the City University of London, Coventry, Imperial. I think we've got some more of these to come as well up on screen. Here we go. Very famous universities here: Manchester, LSE, Newcastle, Liverpool, Leeds, King's College London. And I think we've got one more screen of these. Here we go. Nottingham, Queen Mary, University of London, Sheffield, Warwick. Is it really possible to take on these huge institutions? These institutions with a lot of money and lawyers of their own. Is this a bit of a David versus Goliath battle?
Well, I mean, you'll know that in a David versus Goliath battle, David won. So we hope that that's a good precedent. But it is possible for students to do this. They're not standing alone. That's the key thing, is that they wouldn't be doing this by themselves. If they join student group claim, as the name suggests, it's a group, and we have nearly 20,000 students who've already signed up to our groups at Student Group Claim. And because they're a large group, they have more ability to exert pressure on universities to achieve the compensation that they deserve and that we're helping them to win. So they're not standing alone. They're with a group. They've got expert lawyers helping them, not just our firm, but we're working with another firm of solicitors, Aston Harkus Parker, and top barristers as well. So that's what they get if they join this group.
And what would they get specifically in terms of financial compensation? Because there are so many people joining up, it will be a small slice of the pie that is given out that they receive. What are we so far through this process that we can sort of start to guess at where this level of compensation may arrive at?
Yeah, so our current estimate is that UK students who are at university during COVID would probably be entitled to around £5,000 each in compensation. So that's, if you take your average undergrad who's got a £9,000 or £9,250 tuition fee, and it's the difference between that fee and the value of what they actually received, which was effectively more of an online version of their degree, of their course. So that's how we get to that 5,000 figure. And we think that's approximately what your average kind of student in that situation would get.
Now, some people might say that university tuition fees aren't really tuition fees at all. If you're a medic and you're going to labs every day, your university degree costs tens of thousands of pounds. Meanwhile, if you're someone studying literature, for example, your degree might be costing a lot less. Now, these are sort of socialised fees that have socialised outcomes, because people all pay the same, even though they get different services depending on the different degrees that they do as things stand. And on top of that, students don't actually pay. You don't pay, or at least you don't have to pay, until you are in a graduate job earning a considerable degree of money, and it comes out of PAYE. Is this not simply a tax-funded system rather than a student-funded system? And in that way, would the claim not fall down?
Well, that's a long question. So the answer to that is that the way the government has set up over the years the tuition fee system is that it is paid by the student. Legally speaking, the student pays the tuition fees, and they borrow money from the government, as everyone knows, the student loan fund. They borrow money to cover the cost of that tuition fee. And that loan is then paid back once they start earning over a certain threshold through the PAYE system, as you correctly said. So it's not a tax. It is, legally speaking, the student pays the fee, The fact that they borrowed money to enable them to pay that fee does not affect their status as a consumer. So, if you had if you borrowed some money and then used that money to buy something on Amazon and it wasn't delivered, it wouldn't be a defense for Amazon to say, well, you borrowed the money, so you haven't lost anything. So that's the situation students are in. They have the claim because they're the ones who are entering into that agreement with the university.
Well, Shimon Goldwater, thank you for clearing up all of that really interesting claim there. Now, do remind our viewers just one more time of the website that people can go to if they think they're entitled to this compensation.
Of course, so it's studentgroupclaim.co.uk, and it's a no-win, no-fee claim. So students don't pay anything to join the claim, and they only pay some legal costs if and when they win compensation. If they don't win, then they pay nothing.
Well, Shimon Goldwater, thank you so much for talking us through all of that really interesting stuff going on there, that legal action against universities. Well, coming up, missile strikes have hit the capital, Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, this morning, according to officials in the Ukrainian government and local media. We'll be discussing all of that and the connection between the Russians hacking, allegedly, Liz Truss's phone after a look at this morning's news.
A very good morning. It's 11:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Home Secretary is under increasing pressure over the backlog of migrants arriving in the UK and the conditions of processing centres. It's understood hundreds of migrants were moved to an already overcrowded facility in Kent over the weekend. An immigration watchdog said they were left speechless by safety problems at the site in Manston. The Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, visited the site yesterday and admitted the conditions were challenging. The Shadow Minister of Immigration, Stephen Kinnock, says the government's strategy is not affected.
Just chasing headlines and trying to create a hostile environment, which is not working at all, because we were told, of course, that Rwanda, just the threat of being sent to Rwanda would act as a deterrent, but the exact opposite is happening. We're seeing record-breaking, unprecedented numbers of people coming across the channel.
At least 2 people have been arrested as climate activists targeted several major buildings in London this morning. Just Stop Oil activists sprayed orange paint from fire extinguishers on the Home Office, the MI5 building and the Bank of England. They're demanding the government halts all new oil and gas licences. The King and the Queen Consort have sent their condolences to people affected by the deadly Halloween stampede in South Korea's capital. 154 people died, most of them in their 20s. It followed a crowd surge in a popular night spot. The government's vowed to investigate what caused the accident to make sure institutional changes are put in place so that such an event won't be repeated. Firefighters and fire control staff have begun voting on whether to accept a 5% pay offer. The Fire Brigades Union is recommending its members reject the offer, claiming it represents a significant real terms pay cut against rising inflation. Online and postal ballots are being sent out today. Voting closes in 2 weeks' time. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Good morning, it's 11:36 and this is To The Point with me, Tom Harwood, on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and on your radio this morning too. And missile strikes have hit the capital city of Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, this morning, according to Ukrainian officials and local media. This comes after the news of reported hacking of Liz Truss's mobile phone over the summer, suspected to have been conducted by people working on behalf of the Kremlin. But should this raise the alarm in government? Might we not be fighting on the front line in the UK, but perhaps fighting for our national infrastructure? Is the UK entering a new era of hybrid warfare? Well, joining us now is the former Royal Navy Commander, Dr. Chris Parry. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. First of all, do you think that United Kingdom is under threat?
Well, yes, the United Kingdom is under serious threat from all these totalitarian regimes who want to change the international system of which we're part. And everybody is concentrating on Russia at the moment, but China is also in that bracket, and so is Iran and North Korea. I'm afraid to say that in all our electoral politics, the idea of strategy is something that is something you do tomorrow. And I'm afraid to say that it's catching up very fast with our politicians right now.
Are we naive to think that perhaps our politicians haven't been phone hacked for many, many years? Perhaps we should start thinking that all of our senior politicians have had their mobile communications, private mobile telephones hacked by hostile foreign states for quite some time.
Well, I don't know, Tom, who you mean by we. People like me have been warning for the best part of a decade this has been going on. And it's not just politicians, it's the data exhaust that all of us produce is being farmed and harvested by the Russians, Chinese, and to a lesser extent, the Iranians as well. Our society is completely open and our totalitarian opponents are exploiting that fact. I think our politicians particularly are very trusting, and we've had a strategy, frankly, of wishful thinking. Trotsky very famously said, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested with you. Well, let's just turn that around a bit now. Russia and China are very interested in conflict and competition with the world's democracies today.
And how should we respond to this, therefore? Because the age-old adage is that the terrorists win if we change our lives. If we change the way that we live, then that is them having some sort of success, closing down our open society. Surely the way to combat this sort of threat that we see from hostile foreign powers is not to change the way that we live our lives in a free and open way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Tom. We don't change our lives, we change theirs. We have to constrain them, and across every aspect of our society. It's what I called in a paper I did for the government in 2007, the comprehensive approach. We need to use every instrument and aspect of state power and society to resist all this sort of thing. And it's everything from Confucius Institutes in our universities through the funding that our academics have accepted from Russians and Chinese. And we need to apply the same standards of ethics to investments by Russian, Chinese and Iranian firms as we do to any other thing we don't like very much. It's a complete myth that these regimes, actually want to cooperate with us. They only cooperate with us when they must, and they compete with us and confront us when they can. We're not in a new Cold War because we're in a connected but contested world, but we should be under no illusions that the regimes in China, Russia and Iran mean us harm.
And looking at what these regimes are doing, perhaps most obviously looking at the new axis that has evolved between Russia and Iran, one sending drones to the other deploying said drones to kill innocent civilians in cities in Ukraine. But looking to China, this is a power that has perhaps taken a less obviously militarily aggressive stance, at least towards the West. We know what it's doing in the South China Sea, and we know the threats that it is making against Taiwan. But when it comes to the West and the way that it interacts, it seems to have, if anything, been a little bit nervous at the way that Russia is acting. Is this a divide in our enemies?
No, certainly not. There's a very strong link between Russia, China and Iran. The one between China and Iran has been going on for 30 years at both the political and the senior personal level. And Iran barely does anything unless China lets it do it. The access between Russia and Iran is new, more obvious now than it was. But we should be under no illusions that these three regimes are seeking to dominate the whole continent of Eurasia and the waters around it. They're even saying they want to do that, so we should take them at their word. We're not rigorous enough with them. We don't sort of basically push their toes back across the line when they step across it. We're not robust enough in anything that we do. I mean, Russia was positively encouraged to invade Ukraine earlier this year when nothing happened after 2014. And I'm afraid to say, unless we actually look at the new realities of the world, and as I said, not indulge in the strategy of wishful thinking and see our opponents as they are, not how we want them to be, we are going to be doomed to be on the back foot all the time and possibly defeated in a world struggle for domination.
Yes, it is so depressing to see sort of the errors of history be so clearly rewritten in the last decade or so. First, the invasion of Georgia in, 2007, 2008, nothing happened. Then the invasion of Crimea, the annexation of Crimea, again, nothing happened. No wonder Putin thought he could get away with a full-scale invasion. I wonder what more mistakes we're making as things stand. It's really quite terrifying to think about, but...
You're quite right. You're quite right, Tom. You know, the lessons of history are really relevant here because Putin's playbook is almost exactly the same as Hitler's in the 1930s. He said to his generals famously, you know, who will die for the Rhineland in Britain and France? Who will die for Prague? And of course, nobody would. And the problem is we keep this strategy of wishful thinking going in the hope that we won't have to get involved in conflict. But the issue is that gives the initiative to the likes of Putin and Xi Jinping. We have to put in place deterrent systems and also deterrent theories that they can understand that stop them posing an aggressive threat to the free countries of the world.
Well, former Royal Navy Commander Dr. Chris Parry, always appreciate your thoughts on this programme. Really, really profound stuff to be talking about there. Life and indeed death. Well, on to Twitter now, where billionaire Elon Musk is facing backlash. Just days after taking over the social media giant, Mr. Musk posted a conspiracy theory relating to a hammer attack against the US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. Musk tweeted a link to an article that indicated Mr. Pelosi knew his attacker. The tweet was since deleted. Paul Pelosi suffered a skull fracture after an intruder broke into the couple's home in San Francisco, of course. Well, let's speak to the editor of Spiked magazine, that is, Tom Slater. Tom, should Elon Musk say sorry?
Well, I think he shouldn't have to apologise for having an opinion. I mean, it's not one that I would particularly share, but I thought the response that he gave later on showed that there's always two sides to these different stories. There was a piece in the New York Times, as you say, flagging up that he'd posted this particular story. But, you know, over the course of recent years, the New York Times, many other mainstream publications have pushed stories and narratives which turned out not to be true. This isn't to deflect any criticisms at Elon Musk or any one individual for the opinions that they have. Everyone should have at it. But, you know, when we're talking about social media, it's often treated as very straightforward. What is truth and what is illusion? We end up at that through debate and public discussion. And I think really in terms of the reaction to that particular response to Hillary Clinton, I think it's more wrapped up in the anger that somebody who's a bit more pro-free speech has acquired Twitter that it is shock and horror that he's hold a particular opinion, or did, until we decided to delete that tweet, as you say.
But is this a free speech issue? Of course, people should be able to post whatever they want. Many people would think that, of course. Well, some people would disagree, but many people would think that you should be able to post whatever you want to post, even if that is links to dodgy articles. But if you're the person who owns Twitter, you're the person who wants to be the steward of what you might describe as this sort of marketplace of ideas, does that not put a special responsibility on Elon Musk to be more careful about what he tweets?
Well, I think there is, of course, there's an element of responsibility when you have a big platform like that and when you're in charge of a big platform like that. But at the same time, I think who decides what is and isn't misinformation is by no means a settled subject. We've seen that in recent years, things like the Hunter Biden expose from the New York Post, suppressed by the former leadership of Twitter as well as Facebook, because that was deemed to be misinformation until about a year ago, when the mainstream effectively accepted that story was true. I guess what I'm saying is that even this particular slightly silly story that that Elon Musk has got himself into around this particular attack and the theories that are swirling online around it just demonstrate that these things are never as straightforward as even the kind of establishment sort of media would like to make out. There's always a different side to those stories, but at the same, and also I think the more that we kind of create a situation in which different perspectives can't be discussed, the more you fuel conspiracism, really, of the kind that we might see up in recent days. So I think it's just important we maintain a sense of perspective in that, I guess.
Well, speaking of what the media, perhaps what people might describe as the blue ticks on Twitter will make of this. Blue ticks, of course, are the little check marks that are given to people who are officially verified on the service. There are some reports in the last 24 hours that Elon Musk is looking to charge those with blue ticks to have that special badge of verification on the service. What do you make of this as a plan for Twitter? And particularly, what do you make of some of the reaction from some of the people privileged to have blue ticks, getting really quite angry about it?
I think that was very telling. I mean, I think calling it a plan might be overdoing it slightly, insofar as since he properly took over, Elon Musk seems to have just been floating various different ideas as to what he might respond, seemingly thinking in real time on his Twitter account, responding to ideas people send him. So who knows if it'll ever actually come to fruition. But as you say, I think the response that you saw from the blue tick brigade, from people who already have that distinction, the horror that they might be charged even anything for using Twitter, I think reminds us something about how strange a platform Twitter is that you've got large sections of the media, the great and the good, use it incessantly. And yet the idea that even they might have to be charged for them a relatively small amount for it shocks them, which I think tells us something about how, despite how influential this platform is, we openly refer to it as a hell site and so on and so forth. So it tells us something about the problems that still exist on that platform and how much Musk or anyone else's work is cut out for them in terms of sorting it out.
Yes, you'd think if you're notable enough to have a little blue tick next to your name, you're probably wealthy enough to pay £1 or £2 to have the privilege. I do want to bring to the attention of the audience the words of one person who has a blue tick, who was very, very irritated about the idea that she may have to pay for the privilege. Priyamvada Gopal is a professor at Cambridge University, if I'm not mistaken, who tweeted this: "The blue tick protected many of us from lethal impersonation and fake news. It was a matter of personal safety for me. This is actually not funny." Just lastly, Tom Slater, is having a blue tick on the website twitter.com a matter of personal safety?
I think that's over-egging it slightly. I mean, obviously, when you become a big account, there's often people who try to impersonate you, try to say things that you wouldn't say, and so on and so forth. Try to, drag your name through the mud. But I think certainly someone like Priyamvada Gopal, she does a perfectly good job of doing that herself. So I don't think that's necessarily something which does give you that line of protection. And at the end of the day, this is speech on the internet. We do need to remember that in the midst of these discussions.
Well, Tom Slater, thank you so much for joining us here on To The Point this morning. Really, really interesting discussion there. Of course, Twitter, not the most used website in the United Kingdom, far from it, but one of the most talked about. Now, Housing Secretary Michael Gove has said that the government is still committed to a manifesto pledge of building 300,000 homes every year by the mid-2020s. Mr Gove returned to Cabinet after Truss's resignation, of course, and he said he wanted to build more homes, both for ownership and to rent. But he also warned that meeting the target would be difficult due to the economic circumstances. Well, Let's talk to property expert Russell Quirk for more on this. Firstly, this idea of a target, it was derided by Liz Truss as something that was Stalinist, as something that was anti-market. Yet, to some extent, the housing market is so regulated in the first place, it's so hard to build, it's impossible to build without government position. Perhaps a target, ironically, is the one thing that might be helping the market to work.
Well, yes, I think targets are very important because you have to have a destination, you have to have a direction of travel. I suggest that the reason that Liz Truss wanted to abolish targets is so that she couldn't be embarrassed in the press by constantly missing them as as previous regular governments have done actually since the 1950s. So we haven't hit this wonderful, magical threshold of 300,000 homes being built, as in new homes, since the 1950s. So, right back in the days of Macmillan. And of course, our population now is significantly higher than it was back in the 1950s. People are living longer. Obviously, we have more immigration into the country than perhaps we did then. So I think it's important that we do have a point of focus. But I noted Michael Gove's words this morning, which were that he is committed to a target of 300,000 homes. Well, when you analyse and unpack that sentence, that statement, which unfortunately politicians, as we all know now, you have to do, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't actually say that he's committed to 300,000 homes a year. It says he's committed to the target of 300,000 homes, which is an entirely different thing altogether.
And looking at the numbers of homes that we're building right now, far fewer than comparable countries, far fewer than France. And we look at the house prices that have been spiralling so high. It does make you wonder why so many MPs seem to campaign unlike in the 1950s, where politicians campaigned in favour of building. Look how many houses we're going to deliver. That was Macmillan's big pitch. These days, politicians seem to argue against building, particularly in their local areas. Frankly, has the NIMBY movement won on this issue?
I think it has. I mean, and you're right. We see politicians talking about the need for more housing all of the time. So not just housing ministers and, the likes of Michael Gove as the reinstated cabinet secretary for levelling up housing and communities. We hear them talking about that a lot until it's their constituency. And of course now, because of the power of the minority voice, particularly through social media and Twitter, as you were just talking to your previous guest about, in marginal constituencies specifically, we end up with not just MPs, but councillors that sit on planning committees running scared of what I would say is a vocal minority. Now, what Michael Gove is apparently about to reinstate is his pledge when he was previously the Secretary of State for this particular department, talking about actually allowing local people to decide whether more housing or even a neighbour's extension should be granted in their road. Now, think about that for a second. If we already have a shortage of homes being built, mainly because you've got a stranglehold on development by the top 10 house builders and also a terribly antiquated and inefficient planning system, which in my opinion is way too democratic, with lots of people sitting on planning committees that really don't know the laws and the merits and the rules and guidelines of planning properly enough. When we then start to give more democratic say, more voice to local people, I'm afraid it's obvious that 90% of people in a particular street or community are simply going to say no when it comes to more housing built on the fields and in the gardens around them. So under Michael Gove, be prepared. We will end up with not 250,000 homes, which is about all that's been achieved in the UK over the last few years, not 200,000 homes, but more like 100,000 homes if we give a disproportionate voice to the people of each community, because they're bound to say no.
And meanwhile, house prices continue to rise. I mean, it was a bigger than double-digit rise in house prices last year, rents soaring, and yet this crisis continues to roll on. At least having this target, I suppose, will be able to berate and barrage politicians when they don't meet it, but that doesn't seem like it's particularly satisfying given the outcomes. But Russell Quirk, thank you so much for your views this morning. Really, really important subject there, housing, a matter that really does affect us all. But something else that does, of course, is migration. Just a couple of views of the many, many views that have been sent in today. Gary has said it's intolerable that British people are suffering. No housing, no doctors, no dentists. Cost of living crisis, where if you break the law, you get everything. Well, I don't have much time to get through any others, I'm afraid, but we'll get to more views tomorrow. But clearly, people very irritated by the state of affairs right now. Coming up to discuss more of what's going on in the world today and indeed what to do about it, it's Mark Longhurst with GB Newsday.
Hello, Aidan McGivern here with the latest forecast from the Met Office. Fine for many of us, not all of us, at first today, but it will turn increasingly windy and there will be rain later, although that rain already now reaching Northern Ireland and it will push into Western Scotland during the day. A low pressure to the southwest of the UK, that's pushing this very mild air up across the country at the moment, but it's also bringing that rain I mentioned across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. It'll be heavy and persistent at times.